I will make this presentation style. There we go. Get rid of that. Okay, welcome everyone to our June TechByte. We are at the end of June and practically halfway through the year, which is kind of wild. Today's conversation is going to be about something that I wasn't super sure about how my audience is going to be here. I'm gathering that some of us have heard of inline layers, some of us use them and know them pretty well. Some of us have heard about them but aren't really sure, what they are or how can they apply to me. And then some people haven't heard of them. I've also heard that from both our customer base and from our partner base. So I'm hoping that we'll have kind of all different levels watching this, and some people can get a little bit of info or a lot of info, but hopefully it'll be helpful, right? So I have real short PowerPoint. It is literally 3 slides, and the cover sheet is the first one. And then we're going to a demo. Okay, so I see 1 or 2 more people hopped on, which is awesome. So what is an inline layer? An inline layer is an action which is used to organize sections of the firewall rule base, right? So when you make a rule in the firewall, we all know the action column, which is usually drop and accept are the 2 big ones, right? But there's a few other ones in there, and one of them is inline layers. Creating an inline layer creates a more manageable subset of rules, right? So we're able to take the inline layer and say, hey, if the traffic meets this condition, whatever condition it may be, go to this subset of rules. But if it does not meet this condition, skip the whole subset. An inline layer is independent of the rest of the rule base. So once traffic is determined to be part of the inline layer, it is subject to that section of the rule base. And that rule base becomes essentially its own separate rule base within the rule base. And we're going to see all this illustrated in a minute, and I think it's going to make a little bit better sense. So the other slide and the other question, what can an inline layer do for me? Well, it simplifies and organizes your rule base. By using inline layers, you have these subsections where certain things apply, right? And we can quickly go to our inline layer about a certain topic, change our rules as needed, and we don't have to go digging and searching and have rules, have rules here and there and all throughout the rule base. The layers can be reused in multiple policy packages. So if you have 2 different policy packages or 10 different policy packages, you can reuse the layers and quickly have the same, let's say, inline layer about FTP traffic. We could have it in multiple policies right away, very easy. We can create very detailed rule subsets based on specific conditions. Some of those conditions, for example, are source, destination, VPN, services, and applications, right? Which are, some of the main columns in our rule base, right? We can get very specific rules based on, any one of those. You can delegate the ownership of specific parts of the policy. So I've had this come up. There are customers out there, and it's almost, well, I won't say almost always, it's very frequently about URL filtering, right? There's a separate group at the company. Could be the HR department, could be somebody in just general IT and not in security or not in networking. They're in the end user side of things. There's times where people want to give URL filtering control to a different group, but they don't want that group to have access to the rest of the firewall policy. This is a way to do that, and we're going to see it in the demo. And then last, but certainly not least, inline layers improve the performance of your firewalls and your rule base. Okay. And we're going to illustrate it again in the demo, but when a packet comes in and a connection is made, if that packet doesn't meet the overlying parent rule of the inline layer, it doesn't get inspected by the sub rules. And therefore you skip right over a bunch of rules that your firewall doesn't have to spend CPU, etc., on figuring that one out. So that's, another real perk to inline layers. So that's my big long PowerPoint I cooked up. And while I'm flipping over to the smart console, I'll check to see if there's any questions. Not seeing any yet, which makes sense to me. That's fine. Give it one more second. Okay, very good. So here we are in Smart Console. I was actually thinking to myself this morning that for a guy who works at Checkpoint and does a monthly session on Checkpoint, I don't spend a ton of time in the Smart Console here in our TechBytes. This is my demo. It is a demo environment. It is attached via the cloud. So it's a tad slow, but it's going to be good for our purposes because it's all built out. When you see in this rule base a rule that has this sideways arrow, that's how you know that these rules have an inline layer to them, right? And we see in this rule base, we've got several of them, right? Number 4, number 7, number 9, 12 and 13, probably some more of them. So let's take a look at one. Okay, I'm going to expand this. I'm also going to contract that so we could have a little more space. So here is a web filtering inline layer, right? And look at how the policy is built, right? So if the source is the internal zone and the destination is the external zone, right? So any connection that meets this criteria, the action is not accept or drop. The action is go to the web control layer. And within the web control layer, you see we have these sub rules, and you see they're just labeled out as 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, etc. And you can see that we get very specific about our web control here in these sub rules, right? We're going to block abusive applications. We're going to block the download of executables, right? So here in the content, we choose executables, right? We choose to have block messages. We have specific rules about specific groups, right? So if you're in the HR department, you can have access to the following 3 social medias, right? And you even get a specific type of user check warning, right? Once a day, and you get it per application, right? Let's see if there's any other ones. There's a list of specified URLs that they want to block, and that's here as a specific list, right? So as we can see, there's quite a bit of rules under here that get very specific. You see, here's the next rule that blocks all social networking for everybody else, right, except the HR group. So as we see, there's this nice set of sub rules that applies to URL filtering only when the parent rule is met. You also see how it's kind of nice and smooth looking, and it's very convenient for an admin to come in here and say, oh, where's the web filtering rules? Oh, it's not, rule 10 and rule 74 and rule 119. It's all under rule number 4.1, .2, .3, etc. Right? So it's also cuts down on work for your admins. I'll see another one real quick, right? Because the URL filtering is a great example, but it might be a more obvious one, right? RDP exceptions, right? Who can have RDP? So whenever this firewall sees the remote desktop protocol, right, it sends it to the RDP exceptions layer. And again, we have these sub rules, 12.1, 12.2. And you see the first one is we alert on any RDP attempts from the external. We allow it for the IT help desk users, and we allow it for anybody that's going into the internal lab, right? And we see we have these rules here. Again, they're very organized. You've noticed probably that the inline layers, this is important, all have their own cleanup rule. right? Because this traffic is now caught in this subset of rules, we must have a cleanup rule because the firewall needs to know what to do with this traffic. It'll give you errors if you try to publish without a cleanup rule. And you just set, as you would to accept or deny as your cleanup rule. So that's a good view of those. Any question on that before we move to how do we go and make ourselves an inline layer? I'm going to check the chat real quick. Don't see questions yet, which is awesome. Okay. So let's make an inline layer, right? Let's practice. So I want to make one that applies to remote access, right? So you make a new rule. Source and destination we'll leave as any for now. And we'll change our VPN. Hello. No, it doesn't. Come on. What's going on here? I want to click this box. Why won't it let me? Specific VPN communities. There we go. Mouse is being a little funky. So any time that we see the remote access VPN, right? And this is a very broad rule, right? Because any source, any destination, any service, right? Instead of accept and drop, we choose inline layer and we create a new layer. Let's name our new layer remote access layer, right? And just for laughs, we're going to turn all these blades on, right? We're going to hit OK. And as you see now, there's a drop down. It has created our inline layer. And it started with our default cleanup rule. Now, right above it, we make a new rule. And as you see, the cleanup becomes 4.2 and this becomes 4.1. And I don't know, people over who are coming on VPN, and you could leave this as any now because we're in the sub rules now. And then people who are coming over VPN, they'll be allowed to reach. Let's see, they'll be able to reach the sales land. Why not? Right. So we'll do that, and we'll set this to accept. We could even get a little more specific with this and say, hey, the people in the sales group are allowed to access the sales LAN when they are on VPN, but everybody else is not able to get that LAN. And since our number 2 rule is the cleanup rule, we're just going to drop all of the VPN traffic. So you'd probably want to put some other rules pertaining to VPN here, but I'm hoping that you got the example, right? So we saw that all we got to do is in the action column, create a new inline layer to generate inline layers. So one other thing I wanted to show you about this, you can create a profile for admins that makes it so that they can only edit specific layers. Please ask me that later. So, for example, we can create a permission profile. It's a little slow on this demo environment today. We'll create a new, we're going to hide the Zoom controls because they're in my way. We're going to create a new permission profile for admins. We'll call this the web filtering profile, not ProGuile. And we set it so that edit layers by the selected profiles. Okay, that one's important in here. So we set that up. We publish because you have to have that profile existing on the management to make this next change. Yeah, a little slow today, this demo environment. There we go. It's published. So now to give that web filtering profile just access to the web filtering layer, we click on the menu button up at the top. We go manage policies and layers. We choose layers. And within the access control, we find our web control layer that we had. We edit it. And in the permission section, you see here that like the super users and the default ones all have access to it, but we can also add our new web filtering profile. We hit OK. And then when we publish this, those people will be able to edit only the web filtering profile. So if we had someone in HR, for example, who was going to play with the web filtering, they would have access to that section only to make changes. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show everybody about inline layers. I hope that, yeah, thank you. I hope that that was, helpful and maybe showed you something that you're interested in doing or that you think might apply to you, or even just a good refresher if that be the case. So let me see if we do have a question. Okay, so the question is, the question is a good one, one that I think a lot of people will have. Essentially, hey, we've had Checkpoint for a while. We have quite a few rules, and how can we go ahead and add layers into existing rules? So the cool thing is you can literally drag a rule into a layer. So I realize that rule 6 here doesn't make sense in our rule 4, but let's pretend that it did. You drag it in here, and there it goes. It's added to the layer. So if, for example, you have a dozen URL filtering rules somewhere in your policy, in your rule base, you could literally make a layer for web filtering and then drag each one of those into that layer and make your firewall more efficient, make your admin experience a little smoother, a little easier to find, and it's very good. The other thing, which someone also asked in the questions, and I've never seen it, but it can be done. At least I've never seen it in the wild. Is if you want to get like super specific, you can actually add a layer inside of a layer, right? Like a nested layer. So here we are in the web control layer, and this new rule I'm making will go to a new layer, which is we'll just call it the nested layer, right? And again, we'll do a little bit of this. Okay. The nested layer. And now you'll see that beneath the nested layer, we have 5.3.1, right? So I guess as an example, you could say, hey, like, well, I know, like you could say, hey, the sales group has very, very specific rules when it comes to usage of social media. So we're going to make a sub layer that the source is the sales group, right? Sales, not salsa. Sales group, right? And Now, underneath this, we can make our sub rules that says, these guys can access Facebook Messenger because maybe their customers will contact them via Facebook Messenger for some reason. So we'll allow that. But we don't want them playing any Facebook games. So let's block the Facebook games. Facebook games, and let's also block, I don't know, Facebook sports. You don't need to spend all day looking at sports either. So Facebook sports, we're going to drop those, right? So you see, you could actually make a nested layer and get very specific about, like extremely specific about a specific group, right? Um, yeah. So that was a good question too. Uh, any other questions? Okay. Okay. Well, I will be here for a few more minutes. If you have any questions, of course, you can always email me after the session because that's always what happens to me is I come up with my question like 2 minutes after I get off the session. You can always email me about that. You can always email me about another topic. I'm always interested in hearing if someone's got another topic they'd like to see on one of these sessions. Um, and that's about it. So otherwise, very much appreciate your time. I hope this was helpful and have a great day.